On Primetime Politics tonight, growing concern over the Omicron COVID variant as the search is on for more cases in Canada, and more questions are asked about whether tighter restrictions could be needed. This medical expert will tell us what to watch for and how we should respond. The federal government introduces its latest bill to block the practice of conversion therapy. Justice Minister David Lametti joins me to discuss why this bill goes farther than the last version, which died when the election was called. And our panel of parliamentary journalists on the challenges for governments from the new COVID variant. We'll begin tonight with the growing concern and the response to the new Omicron variant of COVID-19. 3 confirmed cases have been identified in Canada now, 2 in Ottawa and travelers returning to Canada from Nigeria. Ontario is also now investigating 4 other suspected cases. The province of Quebec is reporting 1 case of the new variant in a woman who had also visited Nigeria. And efforts are underway to contact hundreds of travelers who may have returned to Canada from African countries in the past 14 days. The new variant has been detected in more than a dozen countries, and those countries, including Canada, have put in place travel restrictions from those countries in southern Africa where the variant was first detected. And there's likely to be more on the federal response from the health minister on Tuesday. Today, Ontario's top doctor is calling for more testing for all travelers arriving at airports in Canada.
We're working with our federal partners on an enhanced testing strategy. Clearly, that's within their domain at the federal airports for returning travelers, but that is one suggestion that we're offering to them, is to expand the testing beyond those 7 countries. We were fortunate to pick up these 2 cases from Nigeria, given that it was part of a random testing strategy, I believe. I would want to have that expanded to a larger proportion of returning travelers, if not targeted to regions of the globe where we're seeing a higher incidence of the Omicron variant.
We must understand that it will be impossible to contain that virus and don't it spread across the world. And borders cannot close forever because it doesn't work.
Well, Canada's health minister held a virtual meeting with his G7 counterparts today, but Jean-Yves Duclos had nothing more to say today about the federal response. But New Democrats are calling on the Canadian government to press for relaxed trade rules to allow developing countries to produce vaccines.
So we're calling on the Liberal government to change its policy, particularly at the World Trade Organization, where it has been working against efforts by countries who want to see a relaxation temporarily of the TRIPS rules so that countries can more easily produce vaccines for their own citizens.
Well, the Omicron variant has prompted a rapid response around the world, but is it the right response? So much is still unknown about this variant. Dr. Peter Jüni is an epidemiologist and the scientific director of Ontario's COVID-19 Science Advisory Table. He's with me now. Dr. Jüni, thanks for taking time to speak with me today. How concerned should we be about the Omicron variant?
I think we need to take it very seriously. This thing has rapidly taken over South Africa and is about to take over the world. When you think about the situation we were in, when Delta was taking over, it took Delta roughly 3 months to take over South Africa and also Ontario. And this variant now took just 3 weeks, 3 to 4 weeks. So it is really fast, and it's clear this is not a blip. And it's probably a combination of increased transmissibility and the capacity to evade the immune system that makes a difference here.
Right. What should guide the way we respond to it?
So first of all, surveillance is really important, and really then just tracking down all people who are just at risk during the last 3 weeks, who were at risk actually to introduce this variant into the province. What we see is, based on a really excellent genomic testing here, that everything back to about 12 days was just negative. So we don't have any evidence that until 12 days ago there was a case identified in the province which was Omicron. And what we just now need just to make sure is, that in collaboration with the feds, that we really just are able to identify as many people as possible who were in African countries. The point now is, we know that already from growth curves modeled that roughly around 10th of November, there was already probably 20% of the cases in South Africa that were caused by Omicron. Meaning this thing has had time to spread first, also across the continent, but we also then need to be aware of It's not coincidental that we identify cases from Nigeria, Egypt, etc. It's just all over the place, and probably in Africa already. Only the poorer countries don't have any surveillance systems, so we just have a blind flight there.
Okay, how long will it be? You talked about transmissibility and infection and so on. How long will it be before we know whether existing vaccines are going to be effective and will be effective against this new variant?
Well, what is based on what we know right now regarding the mutations, what is relatively probable is that there will be some evasion of the immune system. And it's irrespective of whether you are immune because you were vaccinated or infected. It's the same story, unfortunately. We don't know the extent of it. For that, we need the lab research, and probably in about 2 to 3 weeks, we will know more. We will also know more in about perhaps a week or so, 10 days, regarding the risk of hospital admissions and ICU admissions in those vaccinated as compared to those who are not vaccinated and infected. So I would expect that 2 weeks from now we have a lot more information. Obviously we can't wait, and obviously it's very clear this thing is more transmissible and it has an edge over Delta. Therefore we need to react swiftly.
All right, we've seen there's action about considering more testing. There's restricting flights from these 7 countries in southern Africa. Do you think it's inevitable that in the province of Ontario, but across Canada, we're going back to more restrictions and more public health orders like we've seen in the past?
We will see how this goes. This will be a challenge. What I said in the past, that there won't be any more, going back with really relevant restrictions that are perceivable. Of course, we need to now revise that and see how it goes. What is important to realize is, we were very early with Delta in Ontario because we're so well connected to the world, and we were able to pull it off with Delta. We were first in class for that variant. Now, this one is more challenging, but if we now would revert back to where we were before Thanksgiving with our behavior, this would already help quite a bit. And then, the point will be to find out whether we're able just to have smaller sort of solutions, meaning more people working from home again, just cutting down a little bit on your social activities and dinner parties, etc., being more stringent with masking, good masks, well-fitted masks, better with ventilation, being really disciplined, that vaccine certificates are well implemented. All of that helps, and we need to be aware of that. In the past, we were very successful because we kept the right attitude, and we now just need to become a little bit more disciplined and need to take that very seriously.
All right, a couple of quick questions to finish here. What about boosters? Should we accelerate the process for providing boosters?
Yeah, probably. So one of the challenges right now is we have a lot of people in the province who are eligible who didn't get their boosters yet, which worries me, honestly. We need this. We need to look at this vaccine as a 3-dose vaccine, at least for people my age or older. I'm 54. So that's important. And then in addition, of course, just get even more and more people, especially, racialized communities, really just to understand how important it is to protect themselves now. That's important too. And vaccinate our kids. So 3rd doses help, and all the other vaccine doses help as well. We just need to get the optimal immunity for the population now.
This, of course, fuels the debate over travel bans because they've been implemented again and targeting one or more countries or one region. Yeah. Is a travel ban the right response?
Look, there is no consensus on the effectiveness of travel bans. I think where there is scientific consensus is on the effectiveness at that stage that we are right now to really control the borders well. What does this mean? It means a really stringent testing regimen plus quarantining irrespective of the vaccine status, probably just now at least for all the high-risk countries. And the definition of high-risk country, that will be an open discussion, obviously. It's probably more than just the countries we're talking about. A travel ban, in addition to that, whether this is actually just having any effect or not, that's not clear. We need to be aware of that right now. We're always a step behind. Even when we were very early now, just with having identified this variant thanks to South African colleagues very early, we still are one step behind, and you will see, all these little mushrooms just popping up everywhere in the world, including more here in Ontario. The reasons that we're so early now is that we just have a good surveillance system. All
right, Dr. Peter Jüni, thanks for your perspective again today. Lots to watch for, and more answers we are still waiting for, but thanks for your perspective today. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Well, current and former members of the Canadian Armed Forces who have been affected by sexual assault and sexual misconduct or harassment are about to get an apology. Several of them. On Monday, December 13th, the Minister of Defence, the Chief of the Defence Staff, and the Deputy Minister of Defence will all issue public apologies for failing to build an inclusive workplace for the men and women who serve Canada. The Defence Department has been rocked by sexual misconduct allegations involving leaders at the highest levels of the Canadian military. The federal government has tabled its new version of the bill to ban conversion therapy. The bill, if passed, will make it illegal to engage in practices aimed at changing a person's gender identity or sexual orientation. A previous bill died in the Senate when the election was called, and that bill limited the ban on conversion therapy to children and adults who did not consent to it. The new bill bans the practice outright.
Sadly, many lives still end tragically by suicide. Finally, at 45 years of age, I can stand here and say that I'm the best version of myself. I'm proud to be transgender. I'm proud to be a Newfoundlander and a Labradorian. And I'm proud to live in a country where conversion therapy will be banned.
David Lametti is Canada's Minister of Justice. He joins me now. Minister Lametti, first of all, thanks for your time today. It's good to see you again.
It's my pleasure, Peter. Thank you.
Look, explain exactly what this bill will ban.
Well, this bill will ban the practice of conversion therapy for everybody. And that it will also ban, in addition to that, it will also ban bringing a minor across the border for the purposes of getting conversion therapy. It will ban advertising conversion therapy services, and it will ban profiting from conversion therapy. So we're really aiming at a complete ban on the practice in Canada.
Right. The previous incarnation of this bill banned conversion therapy for children under 18 and for adults who don't consent to it. But this new bill bans the practice, as you point out, outright and entirely. So why have you made that change?
Well, we heard it's really a product of, for the most part, the legislative process last time around. We heard as survivors came forward to tell their stories in front of committee and elsewhere of the really devastating impact of the practice. We also began to get a better picture of how widespread the practice still was, and it still is quite common. It's always hard to get figures on this because it's something that exists in the shadows. And finally, there's also an emerging international consensus, which wasn't present even a couple of years ago. We had a UN special expert recommend that conversion therapy be banned everywhere in the world. We have European countries now actively discussing it. And so in addition to what's happening in Canada, there really is an emerging international consensus that this practice ought to be banned outright. It's torture. You can't agree to have torture, and we're coming to understand that, and we didn't have as clear a picture even a couple of years ago.
Right, but with the last bill, as I pointed out, you didn't propose an outright ban because you didn't feel banning it for consenting adults would stand up to a court challenge. What's changed in your thinking?
Well, we now feel that that additional evidence is something that we could marshal in order to make the argument that this is a kind of, if a limitation on consent were to be seen as a restriction of some sort of freedom of expression or freedom of religion, that it would be something that could be reasonably and demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society, given the additional evidence, given the emerging international consensus that we now have.
All right. So to be clear, you're saying it might still be subject to a court challenge, but that in the past 6 months or so, and based on what you've seen around the world and what you heard from people at the committee hearings, you've decided you're willing to take that chance.
That's right. That's right. I think most fundamentally what we have come to realize is that the practice is so destructive, the practice is so abhorrent that you can't consent to it. You can't consent to torture. And there are other things in the criminal code that we don't allow you to consent to do either. And so this is, I think, a necessary and I think, obvious step.
Let's talk about the road forward here. The NDP and the Bloc and the Greens, they're on the record supporting the ban on conversion therapy. But as you know, the Conservatives were split on this issue in the last Parliament. Erin O'Toole did support the bill, but more than half of the Conservative caucus opposed it. Have you had discussions with the Conservatives about supporting this tougher bill this time around?
We've had a number of informal discussions with all members of Parliament. I won't disclose exactly who I have spoken to yet or haven't spoken to yet. But there is, I think, let's look at the positive. Almost half of the Conservatives voted for it last time. Again, we think the evidence is stronger. We think the societal consensus is stronger. And we hope that Mr. O'Toole will exercise leadership on the parts of his caucus that voted against last time, simply to not re-traumatize victims again in committee hearings, and simply to not make Canadians wait any longer for this piece of legislation. Peter, I'm looking at the positive. I'm looking at working with my parliamentary colleagues in the House and in the Senate. Minister Ian will say the same thing. Minister Boissonnault will say the same thing. We're all going to work together to make it happen with our critics and with everybody else across the aisles, and then we'll do the same in the Senate.
All right, so talk to me about timetable possibilities then. You know, this time ran out in this bill in the Senate before the election was called, when the election was called. So what do you think is a reasonable time limit to those people who have been waiting for this, watching out there? What can you tell them about when you hope to have this become law?
Well, look, I can't speculate. I can say that it's the beginning of a mandate, and so I'm optimistic that we will get this done. I can also say that there is, I think, a consensus amongst some of the people that I've spoken to try to get this through the House as quickly as possible. In order, again, to not re-traumatize people. I know the NDP has come out and said that they would like to pass this bill through the House before Christmas. I will do my best to work with all parties in the House in order to make this happen as quickly as possible. I'm not going to set dates, but I am going to commit to getting this done as quickly as it possibly can be done, working in collaboration with my colleagues in the House of Commons and in the Senate.
Are you making the case, at least on the House side, are you making the case that perhaps there's no need to hold another round of committee hearings on this? Is that the case you would make, that, look, we had committee hearings within the last year on this, let's just push it forward?
Peter, I'd rather not get into that kind of detail on the strategy, other than to repeat that I will do my best working with colleagues on all sides of the aisle to get this through as quickly as possible.
All right. Canada's Justice Minister David Lametti, good of you to take some time to talk about this tonight, and we'll watch the progress of this bill to ban conversion therapy as it moves forward. Thanks for your time.
Thanks very much, Peter.
All right, time now for our Monday panel of Press Gallery journalists. Joining me this week, Tonda MaCharles from the Torono Star, Joël-Denis Bellavance, the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for Presse, and John Ivison, a columnist with the National Post and Parliamentary Bureau Chief for Post Media. Good to see you all. Tonda, I think a lot of us and our political leaders were hoping the corner might have been turned on the pandemic, and I guess now everybody's wondering how the arrival of the Omicron variant changes things, and in particular for governments, federally and provincially, in terms of how they could be forced to respond. What are you watching for?
Well, look, already there are many questions today. For one, are we going to extend the list of country bans? For two, does this mean a change in terms of how we roll out booster doses in Canada if this variant is still responsive to the vaccinations? They tell us, as of last week, they were saying, wait, we need more answers. But there are cases now found in Canada, in Ontario and Quebec, as we've heard. And so it begs the question, where is the health minister? Where are the officials? They gave a briefing on Friday, but 3 days later, there are many more questions. Even the U.S. president came out today to address some of them. So this department, has not learned a lesson through the last 4 waves of COVID. They need to be responsive and on the ball and dealing with people's questions right away.
Yeah, Joël-Denis, what are your thoughts on that, especially as, I guess anxieties are on the rise in the country because nobody knows quite what to expect from this new variant. The health minister, Jean-Yves Duclos, not much to say today, expecting, I think, that we'll have some more news from the federal government tomorrow. Not sure what to expect, but what do you think we could hear from the minister and public health officials?
well, more robust measures. Some of them were announced last Friday, as we know, and I was told that the health department is working on some new measures that will be announced either tonight or tomorrow, most likely tomorrow on Tuesday. And those measures will probably include measures that touch the border. So can we expect maybe people coming from all the continent of South Africa, of Africa, having to observe a longer quarantine, or even that same policy applies to all foreign travelers or Canadian travelers coming back to Canada. So there is a possibility of that. And in fact, the health minister from Quebec said, Christian Dubé, said today that he had some discussions with his federal counterpart and said, you can expect maybe new measures that may affect you if you go and travel this Christmas holiday season. So what you see today may not be the case when you come back in Canada if you leave now. So that means that we should expect new measures at the border.
It's starting to feel a bit like, John, perhaps early days of the pandemic and some of the travel restrictions that might be back on the table. What are your thoughts on the challenges that this new variant could present on the issues we've discussed, but what's been a slow and sometimes fragile recovery, may hang in the balance again now, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, news hates a vacuum, and people are reading stories. For example, the chief scientist of Moderna saying he suspects that this variant will not respond to vaccines because there are 30-odd mutations with it. Now, he does say that Moderna could quickly produce a vaccine and could be available as early as 2022. But you would hope our leaders would come out and try and reassure us to the best of their abilities that, we're not heading back into the early days of the pandemic, that it doesn't necessarily mean a lockdown, that there is no evidence that this variant is more severe or that it's killing more people, because I think what we've seen so far suggests it probably isn't. But if it's not responding to a vaccine, then that's obviously very concerning. And I think that, as Tonda pointed out, we should have had somebody out today talking about this. Every other country in the Western world seems to have had a briefing from senior officials. And, again, like Britain, they're making booster shots available to people over 18. So there are things that governments could be saying right now.
Tonda, there's also, you touched on it, I think, the debate over the sharing of vaccines, and that's now back in the spotlight. The argument that we'll keep seeing the emergence of variants from countries where the vaccination rate is low, and that countries such as Canada have not been fast enough to deliver vaccines to developing countries instead of hanging on to offer booster shots. Is this going to be a moment where, and the NDP was talking about it today, saying this is why Canada needs to go to bat at the WTO and say that, we need to relax patent rules so that some of these developing countries have the ability to make these vaccines. Is there going to be a certain amount of reckoning for Canada here on how it's handled the vaccine issue?
Look, I think that question will have new life now, because obviously variants are proliferating in parts of the world where there's very low vaccination rate to date. And, through no fault of the country's own, they have no supply. So that's going to be a live question. And remember last spring, this was a really, I think, touchy challenge for the Liberal government when, even as they were taking in vaccines for our population from our contracts, we were also dipping into the pot that we'd allotted for the developing world. So but I did notice today that the U.S. president promised that, no vaccines that they plan to send abroad would be taken from the pot that would go to U.S. citizens, or basically assuring U.S. citizens that they would be covered. That's the kind of assurance that the ministers could have come out today and given Canadians. We'll ensure there's coverage here. But meanwhile, this is why we have to tackle the international issue and the absence of vaccines in so many countries. But look, just to Joël's point about other measures, I noticed that both the Ontario and Quebec health ministers today, or actually it wasn't the health minister in Ontario, it was the chief medical officer of health, they're urging everybody to take more precautions, but they're also calling on Ottawa to do more. So I think there are issues that politically the government has to address and fast, else they'll be charged with neglecting their duties as they were last year through the second and third waves.
Yeah, Joël-Denis, talk to me about that and the challenges facing the government here in terms of the ability, in the past, the government was accused of trying to do too much in some cases and restrictions that were tamping down the economy. But they're going to face these same questions again, and the need to keep Canadians safe.
Well, before this variant came on the scene, remember the federal government was being accused of going too slow at removing some of the restrictions for travelers, and when they announced it was not enough. Now, so it's the other side of the fence now, and I think they will say that we were prudent and cautious. So I guess we'll see how this variant is transmissible and if it causes as much damage as the Delta variant, for example. But I'd like to come back to the sharing of vaccines with other countries. Currently, Canada is so far walking on some eggs. Remember, Mr. Trudeau was not, the one leading the charge to make sure that some pharmaceutical would share their formula with other countries, so that they could have their own industry and their own company to make it in South Africa, for example. Canada is trying to rebuild its biofabrication industry, so they will be walking on eggs for the foreseeable future, not wanting to scare off some potential industry like Moderna who wants to come to Canada, and because we will be favoring sharing their formula to build a vaccine. So that's Canada is a very difficult situation right now, sitting on the fence as a result of it.
John, just in the minute or so we have left, I want to get your thoughts on it. Last week, when the federal government rolled out its latest measures for COVID support, the finance minister said this would she hoped, be the last COVID-19 support package the government would have to do. Talk to me a little bit about what the government could be facing here if they've got to do this again against a tough fiscal line.
Well, I think we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. I mean, I do think that, the chief scientist from Moderna, for example, I was referring to, he said, we know an awful lot about this disease now. We're not going into it cold like we did in 2020. So I don't think that any government around the world suspects that it's going to have to ramp up and spend hundreds of billions of dollars that it did in the last 18 months. Having said that, I do think that most folks thought that we were out of the woods. The government had set aside another $7 billion for sensitive industries and for workers who were in those industries. Maybe we do have to go back to the well again. It may not be quite as plain sailing as we had hoped it was going to be. But I think people should be relatively optimistic that we've got this far, that it's not March 2020 all over again, and that at some point vaccines that do work against this variant will be available. And it sounds like they might be available pretty quickly. All
right, lots to watch for. We'll leave it at that. Thank you all for your time today. Do appreciate it, and we'll talk again soon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Primetime Politics on CPAC. I'm Peter Van Dusen. Until next time, take care, and thanks for watching.